everyone, it's Lindsay. Welcome back to another video. So I showed you how to make a DIY mold and decal to make handmade paper. So today I want to show you the process of how I made that paper. So I'm starting off with my mold and my decal that I made in the previous video. If you haven't watched that, I'll link that in the upper right hand corner, so you can go check that out first. If you want to be able to make your own, you can always buy these on Amazon. I will leave a few links down below as well. This is an absolute need. You need something to pull that pulp out of the water. For my paper today, I'm starting off with old book pages. These have been soaking in water overnight. These are books I have picked up at Goodwill, local thrift stores, those kinds of things. These are books that were going to go to the landfill anyway. If you are upset by this, move along. This is how I decide that I want to reuse these books. Now, what's going to happen with using old book pages, your pulp is not going to be finely ground, or mine isn't with what I use as my blender. You can absolutely get it to a fine pulp. That's not what I was looking for. I wanted some of these old book pages to peek through in my handmade paper. So I am putting these into a blender. This is one of those bullet blenders. They are not very powerful. If you want a finer pulp, go ahead and use your more high-powered blender. That's totally fine. I just didn't want that look. I'm using a lower-powered blender. So I filled up my little cup, and I'm going to add some water to this. You need some liquid to get this process going. I should mention, once you have used your blender for this process, you probably don't want to use it for food again. You're never going to be 100% sure that you can get all of that paper pulp out of the machine itself. Once you have a little bit of water in there, you need to start blending. This is kind of trial and error. If you need to add a little bit of water, you can add more water. It does take more than you realize, especially with these older book pages. They are very fibrous. They tend to soak up that water pretty quickly. So I just keep a little jar of water on hand. I like to use warm water. I feel like that breaks the paper down a little bit better. And I just continue to blend until I get a nice pulp. Mine is still a little chunky just because, like I said, I wanted some of those old book pages to peek through. But once I am done blending my little sludge together, I'm going to put this into a separate tote. Either a tote or some sort of like silver baking container. And as you're making paper, you will find out just about how much pulp you're going to need. Make more. You can always dry this out and reconstitute it with water if you have too much. But I found that I needed a lot more pulp than I thought I was going to need to make this. And maybe that's just the paper I used. Some other options for different paper you can use your junk mail, you can use old cardstock, you can use printing jobs that maybe didn't go quite right, you can use old newspapers. I also threw in a little bit of it was thinner cardboard, not cardboard itself, but almost a craft paper like you would get in packaging. I wanted that brown look, so you'll see some of that peek through. And here's about the consistency that I was going with. It looks like a step 2 baby food, if you will. So not your finest puree, not your chunkiest, but somewhere in the middle. I still wanted some of those chunks in there. Now, once I had it to this consistency, I went ahead and put this in the tote. Now, once I had a good amount to start with in my tote, I actually started putting the remainder of what I was blending into this, it's a baking dish, but it's a disposable kind of one of those silver ones, just to hold it while I worked. Now, this looks quite wet, but you are going to need to get even more water and add that to it. Now for my bath, I am using just a plastic reusable tote. You can use anything you have on hand. You just want to make sure that it is large enough for you to put in your mold and decal, almost in a scooping formation, and then be able to pull it straight up and out. So you want a good amount of room, maybe at least 3 to 4 inches on each side, to be able to get that in and out easily. And like I said, I kind of filled up the bottom. I'm probably an inch deep in there with pulp. And this is just the water that came out as I was blending. I haven't added any more. But now I am going to start adding some more to thin this down. If you were to pull it now, it would be much too thick. You want to add some water and do a couple test pulls as you're adding this to get the right consistency. So once you add water, do a couple test pulls, see how it's going. And if you need to add a little bit more pulp, you can absolutely do that if you want a thicker paper. Now, how much pulp you have with your water is going to depend, or is going to determine the thickness of the paper you're pulling. So here you can see I've got a good amount. I'm going to go ahead and dip my mold and decal in and pull straight up and out. This is quite a thin layer, but that's what I wanted. And you can see as I pull that, I have some of those nice chunky bits still in there. A little hard to see while it's wet. You can definitely see them more when they are dry. Then I'm going to let the water drain over this bucket or the tote and let that drip down. Keep that mold right on top, and then once the water's drained, you can pull that off. You've got your paper sheet on there now, and you're going to flip it onto a dry surface. Here I'm using a towel. This is just for demonstration purposes. What I actually did was I had a table, just a folding table set up behind me, and I put an old sheet down on top of it, just a regular cotton sheet like you would lay on at bedtime. Put that down over it, then flip my paper on top of it and used a sponge, or you can use a towel, whatever you have on hand, something to soak up that extra moisture. Now, if you flip it while it's still wet and you don't wait like I did, what should happen is when you pull this up, the paper will stick to that bottom sheet or towel. However, mine didn't do that here. I let it dry a little bit too long on my mold. If this happens, all you have to do, you can try and give it a few more presses. Mine was pretty dried on there though. I, again, waited too long getting everything set up for the video, so I could actually just peel mine up off the decal itself. It was really simple and easy, and then you just put that right down to dry. Now, drying time is, again, going to depend. If you put it outside, it's going to dry faster. I let mine dry. I was in a basement. It took a couple of days, and it was colder down there. This was during the winter time, so definitely colder. I'm in Iowa, so it took a couple of days, but it dries very easily. And the great thing about my method using the sheet, I layered. So I had about 3 layers of this, one on top of the other. So as it dried, I would remove some sheets, let the layer underneath dry, remove those sheets, let the layer underneath dry. And then for my last little bit left in the bucket, I just scooped it out and placed it down, kind of made a little brick, if you will. But this is a great little piece to use on your junk journals, those kinds of things. Once you've done the work of mixing up the paper, I don't want to let it go to waste. But you can see some of those craft bits poking out in that little piece. I absolutely love the way this looked. But like I said, I let mine dry. I just kept coming back and giving it a little test, a little feel with my fingers. Once it is dry, you can simply start at one edge and peel it right up. If you've done it right, it's probably going to be stuck a little bit to that sheet or whatever you have underneath it. Just give it a nice gentle pull and it will come right up. But you can see some of those nice chunky bits that are left in mine. And you can actually, I'll show you in the finished photos, see some of the book pages that didn't get. You can see actual words. It's pretty cool. You also will have a nice texture. Depending on what screen you used or what your screen looks like, you're going to have a different sort of texture. Also, depending on what you secure your finished sheets down to, that's going to depend on the texture as well. So mine was a nice flat sheet. I got a nice flat surface. You use something more of a towel, you're going to get a little bit more textured surface. So think about that as you put your sheets down as well. Now, some of these I went ahead and sprinkled some coffee bits onto. You can use instant like I used, or you can use old coffee grounds. It soaks into the paper while it's wet. It's a really neat effect. Some other things I did, I also added some coloring to my water. You can use liquid watercolors, or you can sprinkle some watercolors over the top while it's still wet. Here are some coffee grounds sprinkled, a lot of different things. You can add coffee to the mix and it's going to pull a more brown color. You can add some food coloring to the mix and it's going to put whatever color, it's going to dye your paper, whatever color you put in there. A lot of different options, a lot of different ways you can play around with and make it your own. This is just the way I did it. This was the look I was going for. So I adore the way these turned out. And I have to say that I love the ones that I sprinkled the coffee bits on, but I think the ones that are going to get used the most are those chunky pieces where you can see those book pages in the back of it, and just the plain old regular kind of muddy gray color that I pulled. Here I added a little bit of green to the mixture for those last little bits to kind of pull those. A very light color. The longer you let the color sit in there, the more it's going to dye the pages. These fold really well as well. Sometimes your book pages, when you use those, it can get a little brittle. And again, it's going to depend on what kind of paper you used. I used old book pages, which are essentially brittle to begin with. So putting them, making them into these new sheets, they're going to be a little brittle. That's okay. If you don't want that, use newer sheets of paper and do it that way. It really is up to you how you can make these look. But this was the look I was going for, so this is what I did. If you want to make something similar, you can follow these steps, or you can take some of these and switch them out to make it your own and fit your style a little bit better. There are so many different ways that you can customize this, from the start to the finish, the paper, what you add to your water, what paper you use, what you secure your paper down onto whenever you're done, what screen you have in your decal. All these different things are going to determine what kind of paper you pull and how you might want to use that paper. There are also so many different additives you can use. You can throw in some old book pages. You can use straight book pages like I used. You can use old boxes or old cardboard looking paper like I used here in some of mine. You can use string. You can use glitter. You can use seeds. You can use coffee grounds. There are so many different things you can add and make these papers your own. So I hope you guys have fun playing around with it as much as I did, and have fun making this your own. Now, I did mine in the winter in the basement. I would suggest this be a summer project for the majority of people. Do it outside. Let them hang outside on a nice breezy day to dry. They're going to dry so much quicker. You're going to have less mess. This is a very messy project. It is wet. It is cold. So keep that in mind as you decide to do this. Maybe do it outside on a deck or in your driveway or in a garage or somewhere like that where you're not so worried about the water. And set up a nice drying table outside in the sun, in the wind. It won't take near as long for these to dry, and you can have them done within a day. If you do decide to do it inside, just be sure that you have something down to protect your floor, because it is, again, very wet, very messy. So keep that in mind. Protect your surface, protect your floors, but have fun with it. Make it your own. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, happy crafting.